I was 16 years old at the time and also very short and skinny, the least threatening person you could imagine. I'd just got my first ever job as a checkout girl at the one supermarket in my small town, which I was really excited about. Also, I live in England. When I finished my first year at college, I found myself agreeing to every overtime shift that I possibly could. To be precise, I ended up working either 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., or 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. every weekday. Sure, I had regular customers, but there was one man who I eventually noticed was coming in every single day at the same time, sometimes more than once. He was an Indian man, about 30 years old, had a receding hairline, and absolutely always wore horribly patterned shorts with socks and sandals. He always wore shirts that looked out of place. His collection of Hawaiian shirts was very ugly indeed. No matter how long my queue of customers was, he'd make sure to join it. If there were 3 people in the queue doing their big weekly shopping, he would join in on the end, despite always having a basket with never less than 4 items in it. I thought nothing of it the first few times. I would always make idle chit-chat because that's part of the job. He seemed to really like talking to me, but then again some elderly people come in just to talk, so I dismissed that. I realized something was up when he began asking me every day what time I finished that night. I would always tell him that I finished at 11:30 at night, by which time the supermarket was shut, just because I usually fear the worst. My fears were confirmed a month and a half or so later when he came to my till as usual, seeming to be annoyed. He started shouting, "I've waited outside for you at 11:15 every night for the last week. I didn't see you, not once. I checked both exits. You've lied to me." I was scared, so I apologized and mumbled something about being allowed to leave early all of the days which he must have waited. I hated upsetting people, no matter how creepy or weird. I've learned my lesson now. On another occasion, he asked for my number, to which I told him I didn't have one. He seemed frustrated and replied, "Come on, you must have some way I can contact you. What about a landline?" To which I ever so sneakily gave him the supermarket I worked for's number. After these incidents reoccurring for about 2 months, I told my supervisors who kindly would look out for him, and upon seeing him join my till, they would come and take over and let me briefly run away. I didn't want to tell anyone at first because I was new to the job and was reluctant to cause a scene. One of the supervisors told me he handed in a bunch of flowers for me at the customer service desk, on a few occasions. Another of my supervisors informed me that he would often come in on the rare occasion that I wasn't working, look around for me and perhaps ask someone if I was working, and when he would hear that I wasn't working, he would leave without buying anything. Sometimes I'd see him in the supermarket after that, but he could never talk to me because I would run and hide somewhere in the supermarket. I stopped doing so much overtime shortly after anyway, as I returned to college after the summer to study a new course. It didn't all end there though. There's only one way to walk into town from my house, which I frequent a lot. There also used to be a small shop I'd walk past on the way, which seemed to sell bags, suitcases, and phone cases that were all generally rather tacky and ugly. I'd never been in this shop, just seen the window displays. This is important later. I'd always walk home with headphones on, which I now understand is a big mistake. One day I was shuffling home from a day at college, on a rare hot day in England, with no headphones on. I could hear someone walking behind me, but out of not wanting to look rude, I held my phone up in front of me, like a mirror, to see who was behind me. It was my old friend from the checkout, staring straight at me. He didn't know that I knew he was behind me though. Despite being 5 minutes from my house, I didn't want to run home and have him know where I lived. Instead, I thought the best idea would be to walk quickly and hide, so that's what I did. I sped up my pace, and once I got around the corner where he was a few meters behind, I quite literally darted into a bush. Peering out of it, I saw him as he turned the corner. He looked around, slightly confused, and then I heard him shout, "Where is she? Where did she go?" To which a man with a similar accent in similarly broken English replied that he didn't know. I hid here until they walked back past in the direction they'd come, then I ran off home. I never once told my parents that any of this was happening. So naive. A week later I was packing my suitcase for my family holiday, which was a fortnight away, when I broke the zip to my suitcase. My dad said he'd come to the shitty suitcase shop with me to get a new suitcase because it was close to our house. Upon entering, I saw my old friend once again. It was his shop. I tried to remain calm as my parents didn't know about him, and also largely because I was a wimp and somehow had convinced myself it was all a misunderstanding. I avoided further eye contact, pointed out a suitcase to my dad, then told him I was going to wait outside because I was hot. I was shaking with nerves. Everything made a lot more sense now. He'd know when I was working because in order to get to work, I'd have to walk past his shop, and that was how he'd followed me home that time too. I reckon he followed me more than once though because, like I said, that was the one time I forgot my headphones. When me and my dad got home, I explained everything to him. My dad's pretty scary. He's an ex-football thug who changed his ways when he met my mom. He went straight back to that shop and, from what he says, had a bloody good word with that guy and knocked some sense into him. Whenever I had to go to town for the next week, I'd get a lift off one of my parents or my brother. Then, when we returned from our 3-week holiday, the shop and flat above it were boarded up. I haven't seen the creepy man since, and I've gained a lot more confidence in the year and a bit since this all happened. I can't believe he was so close by the whole time. Likewise, I can't believe I was so stupid to walk around obliviously with headphones on in the midst of all this. And also I regret not telling anyone sooner. I can't believe I just passed it all off because I didn't want to cause a scene. The police never got involved, most likely because my stalker was highly unlikely to report that he'd been beaten up by my dad for stalking me for around 7 months. These encounters happened in early 2016. I live in Perth, Western Australia, and was residing in the suburb of Palmyra at the time. The local supermarket was called Woolworths, conveniently situated right across the road from mine and my girlfriend's house at the time. Obviously, groceries were a necessity, and one day I was smoking outside in the car park of the grocery store, reading a book on criminal psychology. I was in my own world when I felt someone tap me on the shoulder and ask for a lighter. She was one of the shop's employees on her break. She had shoulder-length brunette hair and dark eyes, around the same age as myself. We started chatting casually as we were smoking, and she looked at my book with curiosity, explaining that serial killers had always fascinated her. I agreed, as criminology and true crime have been one of my favorite topics since I was a teenager. She suddenly got this weird smile across her face and told me that she'd actually written a book about serial killers. The hairs on my arm stood on end, but I brushed it off as just being cold as it was quite windy. She said she had to go back to work, but that I should come by some other day and chat crime then. She shook my hand and told me her name was Gemma. Looking back, I got a strange feeling from her, a slight, uncomfortable twist in the gut that I just passed off as her seeming to be a bit of an outcast. She just seemed a bit different, quirky, but nothing that was overly concerning. Over the next few weeks, I saw Gemma sporadically and even had a few coffees with her at Smoke Break. We didn't really talk about anything personal. She was very guarded and vague if I asked personal questions, but she could talk my ear off about music, serial killers, and crime. She had her favorite killers that she found most interesting. One particular incident that stood out to me was when we were debating the use of the death penalty in America, when she grabbed my arm out of the blue and said, "Don't you ever want to know what it feels like to kill someone?" I was taken aback as it was such a direct question, and one I could never even think of doing, let alone feeling. I shrugged my shoulders and said, "No way. I'd rather be a criminal psychologist and help put killers away." She just stared off into the distance and said, "I think I could do it if I really wanted to." Work started to get really busy for the next few months, and I didn't see Gemma after that. I asked some of the other employees, but they just said she was on holidays. Shortly after that, I moved out of that house, so I never visited that shop again. I never really gave her another thought. I was very shocked to see and read news articles a year and a half later that she and an older female friend had murdered an autistic teenager, and she was in prison awaiting sentencing. It made my blood run cold. I always look back and feel really horrified that I even broached the subject of criminology with her. I've been interested in wanting to know why criminals behave in certain ways. I'm now studying psychology at uni, but it gives me a sick feeling to think that that was the subject of our conversations. I feel so bad for the murdered guy's family, it's just so tragic. This happened when I was about 18 or 19. I'm now 21, and I'm still very curious about what this creepy man wanted. I went to the grocery store with my mom in the middle of the day, so it was pretty crowded there. When we first walked through the door, I noticed this man wearing paint splatter clothes standing there talking to some other guys, and he was staring at me as I walked by. I didn't think anything of it because I'm used to guys being creepers by now, and I was with my mom, so what is he gonna do? Well, after about 15 minutes of us doing our shopping, I had noticed we crossed paths a few times with the man I first saw when we walked in. Again, I didn't really think much of it, just thought he was shopping like the rest of us. But then it got to a point where I started seeing him too often. Like every single aisle we walked down, he would come down as well. So my creeper radar went off, and I began to pay more attention. I noticed this man had no cart, no basket, not even one item in his hands, and we had been shopping for at least 20 minutes by now. I also noticed that every aisle we went down, about 20 seconds later, he would be right behind us and stop maybe 15 feet away, grab a random item off the shelf and glance back and forth from the item he was holding to us. Once we would begin walking to the next aisle, he would put the item back on the shelf and continue to follow us, never once keeping any items he had grabbed. After about 3 aisles of this behavior, I decided I wasn't overreacting, and I told my mom. I whispered to her that I think this man is following us, and she casually glanced over and didn't say anything. The next aisle, there he was again. I pointed it out to my mom a second time and told her this is the 4th or 5th aisle he has directly followed us down without getting any items. This time she definitely noticed it and was weirded out but continued on as normal. Every new aisle we would walk down, he would follow and kept doing the same weird thing by grabbing random items and immediately putting them back as soon as we started walking. We just kept whispering to each other how creepy it was getting but didn't know what else to do. We got into the fruits and vegetables section and didn't notice him follow us to the area. After about 2 minutes, we noticed him in the corner looking at and holding the coconuts and staring at us. Like, really? I know you're not here to buy coconuts, just stop. He wasn't even trying to be discreet anymore. So we finally finish our shopping and go to get in line. We notice him exit the store. He never once bought a single item, and we were in there for an hour. We start devising a plan to escape without him seeing us in case he was outside waiting for us. The line is pretty long, so it takes us about 10 minutes to get to the front. Just as we are loading our groceries back into the cart, we notice him walk back inside and stop and scan the area. He makes direct eye contact with me, smiles, and just walks into the store down one of the aisles. We grab the rest of our bags and walk outside as fast as we can, hoping we would be faster than him, as we didn't see where he went once he walked back inside. We left out of a different exit than he had walked in, and as soon as we got outside, he was there, walking directly toward us. I instantly froze in fear because I was so scared. My mom put her hand on my back and gave me a little shove and told me to go directly to the car and get inside and lock the doors while she loaded the groceries. As soon as she was finished and got into the car, she said she saw him get into his truck and he was just sitting in there waiting. We began driving home and, of course, he began following us. My mom started to speed up, and as soon as we went around a turn and he lost sight of us, she pulled into a random gated parking lot and we hid in there as he drove by. We waited for about 5 minutes to make sure he didn't see us or come back, and we went home.